Hello students, welcome back to all. In this video, I am going to explain about the Bronsted Lowery acids and bases. So this is one of the most important theory regarding these acids and bases. See, the Danish chemist Bronsted and an English chemist Lowery, both of them gave more information regarding what is an acid and what is a base. So according to this Bronsted Lowery acid and base, acid means the substance which is capable of donating a proton or the hydrogen ion, which means simply we can call it as proton donor is called acid. Proton donor means H plus ion donor, whereas base means proton acceptor. We call it as base. So acid means proton donor, base means proton acceptor. Consider one example. Take the ammonia. This ammonia is reacting with the water molecule. So we get NH4 plus OH minus. This is a reversible reaction. So here in this case, if you observe here this H2O molecule is acting as an acid because it is donating proton to the ammonia. So that is why NH3 becomes NH4 plus. Is it clear? So this is a base. Why NH3 is a base means here it is accepting the proton from the water molecule. So that is why H2O is a proton donor and NH3 is a base. If this reaction is reversible reaction, then this NH4 plus becomes an acid. Why it becomes an acid? Because this NH4 is donating one proton to the OH minus and OH minus is accepting that proton and becomes H2O. So that is why this is called base. Is it clear? So if you observe here in this case, there are two acids and two bases, which means in the forward reaction, this ammonia is accepting the proton from the water molecule and it becomes base. And here the H2O molecule is donating the proton and becomes acid. In the second case, in the reversible reaction, this NH4 is donating the proton to the OH minus and it becomes NH3. So that is why this is acid. Whereas in the case of OH minus, this is accepting the proton and becomes base. So this is what the Bronsted Lowery acid base theory. According to this theory, the acid and base will be like this. But if you observe here, what is the difference between this NH3 and NH4 plus? If you observe here, there is a difference, only difference between the NH3 and NH4 plus is only single proton. If you observe here, what is the difference between H2O and OH minus? This is also the single proton. So in this case, if you observe here, this H2O and H plus, OH minus, these two are differed by the single proton. But here in this case, this ammonia and NH4 plus, these two are differed by the single proton. Which means he told that the acid base pair, so this is a base, this is an acid. The acid base pair that differs by the single proton, only one proton. So then it is called as conjugate acid base pair. Is it clear? Conjugate acid base pair. I will explain once again what is the conjugate acid base pair. So what is the conjugate acid base pair? The acid base pair that differs only by single proton. Take one more example. If you take HCl, it is reacting with the water molecule and we get H3O plus Cl minus. If you observe here, in this case, the HCl is an acid because it is donating proton to the H2O. So that is why this is an acid, this is an base. In the reversible reaction, if you observe here, H3O plus, this is an acid because it is donating proton to the chlorine atom, chlorine ion. So this is why it is base. If you observe here in this case also, this H2O and H3O plus, these two are differ by the single proton. And in the same way HCl and Cl minus, these two are differ by the single proton. If your acid means it is donating one proton, here base means accepting that proton. So the acid base pair that differs by the single proton is called conjugate acid base pair. So according to the Bronsted Lowery acid base theory, this concept is also introduced. Conjugate acid base pair means the acid base pair that differs by the single proton. And now let us see one more example. In the first example, take NH3 and H2O, NH4 plus and OH minus. So already we discussed, in this example this is a base and H2O is an acid. Whereas this is a acid, this is a base, we named it as. Here this NH4 plus is called conjugate acid, whereas OH minus is called conjugate base, because here NH3 is a base and acid. So these two are differ by the single proton. So that is why this is called conjugate base. And H2O OH minus, these two are differ by the single proton. So that is why it is called conjugate base. See, if Bronsted acid is a strong acid, for example, if it is a strong acid, then its conjugate base must be the weak base. Which means for the strong acid, we have a weak base. For the strong base, for the weak acid, we have a strong base. In the same way, for the strong base, we will get weak acid. In the same way, for the weak base, we will get the strong acid. Which means, according to this conjugate acid base theory, if we have a strong acid, then we will get the weak base. Conjugate base must be the weak. If it is a weak acid, then the conjugate base must be the strong. In the same way, if we have a strong base, then the conjugate acid must be weak, and the weak base, the acid must be strong, conjugate acid. So like this, you have to remember this point. How the questions will be there in your examination. Let us see. First question. What is the conjugate base of H minus, HS minus? So here asking is conjugate base. Then HS minus is a acid. So it is an acid. To get the base, it loses one proton. So that is why it loses H plus and S minus 2. So the conjugate base is S minus 2. Like this. Another question. What is the conjugate acid of NH3? Because NH3 is a base. If it is a conjugate base, if it is a base, then we get the conjugate acid. So that is why here H plus is added to the NH3 and we get NH4 plus. NH4 plus is a strong conjugate acid. So it is a weak base. So that is why we get the strong conjugate acid. So there is a trick is there. In the question, if suppose the conjugate acid is asking, in the question, the conjugate acid is asking, then you have to add one H plus to the given. If conjugate base is asking, then you have to remove this H plus. So here adding is there, in this case removing it. So this is the best trick you have to remember. In your examination, if conjugate acid is asking, then you have to add one H plus. If conjugate base is asking, then remove one H plus. Let us see one more question. What is the conjugate acid of HS minus? Which means HS minus is a base, obviously. So that is why here conjugate acid is asking. If conjugate acid is asking means you have to add one H plus. Then we get H2O H. So this is the conjugate acid. Like this you have to answer the question. So this conjugate acid base concept is very important. This will come in your board exams as well as competitive exams like JEE, NEET and EAMCET, all those things. Okay, let us see one more example. So here the question is, what will be the conjugate bases for the following Bronsted acid? HF, H2SO4, HCO3 minus. Here the base is asking. So in your question, according to our trick, if base is asking means you have to remove the one proton. By removing one proton we get F minus and HSO4 minus and CO3 minus 2, because the conjugate bases should have one proton less in each case. Conjugate base means nothing but we have to remove one proton because it is having less one proton. Difference between these two is one proton only. Acid having one proton more, base having one proton less. So that is why we are removing the proton from the given acids. Then we get fluorine minus HSO4 minus CO3 minus 2. Like this you have to answer the questions in your examination. Okay. Next, let us see one more question. So the question is, write the conjugate acids for the given Bronsted bases. Here the bases are given NH2 minus, NH3 and HCOO minus. We have to find out the conjugate acid. So conjugate acid means we have to add one extra proton because the conjugate acid having one extra proton in each case. So that is why we have to add one proton. Then NH2 minus become NH3, NH3 becomes NH4 plus and HCOO minus becomes HCOOH. So like this. So there is the difference between only acid and base is only single proton. If acid is given, then you have to, if acid is given, then base will asking. If conjugate base is asking means you have to remove the proton. If conjugate acid is asking means you have to add the proton. Like this. And let us see the last question from this topic. So here the question is, the species H2O, HCO3 minus, HSO4 minus and ammonia. These species can act as both acids and bases. Then we have to find out the corresponding conjugates and conjugate base. First given species, let us write H2O, HCO3 minus, HSO4 minus and NH3. So what is the acid and what is the base? Conjugate acid and conjugate base. If H2O is given, if you write the conjugate acid, then you have to add one extra proton. Then H3O plus, it becomes H3O plus because we are adding one proton here. For the base, we are removing one proton here. Then H2O becomes OH minus. Like this. Which means the H2O may be act as both can acid as base. If a acid is asking, then you have to add one proton. If base is asking, you have to remove one proton, like this. In the same way, HCO3 minus. So here one H plus is adding, add one H plus, it becomes H2CO3. If you are removing one proton from this, then it becomes CO3 minus 2. HSO4 minus 2. Acid becomes H2SO4 because you are adding one proton. If you are removing one proton from this, we becomes SO4 minus 2. In the same way, NH3, adding one proton, it becomes NH4 plus. By removing one proton, it becomes NH2 minus. So, like this, the questions may be asked from this topic. If you have any doubt, you can ask me through the comment section. In the next video, we will discuss some more points. Okay, thank you. If you like my video, if you want more videos from this, please do subscribe my channel and share to your friends and colleagues. Thank you, all of you.